I'd love to introduce Professor Puri, who will be helping us kick off the program and help us kick off the lecture series. Professor Puri is the head of the Department of Plastic Surgery and Burns at Seth GS Medical College and the King Edward Memorial Hospital in Mumbai, India. Her areas of expertise include hand surgery, reconstructive microsurgery, brachial plexus surgery, and burns, which she has shared and has written about in over 50 peer-reviewed articles and chapters. Professor Puri is a true leader in the field, serving in many leadership positions. These include being the immediate past president of the National Academy of Burns India, being the previous editor of the Indian Journal of Burns, being an executive board member of the International Society of Burn Injuries and the Asia Pacific Burn Society, being research's honorary medical director for India, being an advisory board member of the Regional Organ and Tissue Transplant Organization, and sitting on the medical advisory board of Impact India Foundation. For her tremendous work in leadership, she has been awarded numerous awards. These include the Phulan Devi Gupta Award, which is given by the National Academy of Burn India for outstanding work in the field of burns, the Donald Laub Humanitarian Award, awarded by Research International, the Sofdurng Professorship by the National Academy of Burn India, and the Kilner Award and the NH Antia Award from the Association of Plastic Surgeons of India. She was also a previous visiting professor for the Association of Plastic Surgeons of India. And finally, but certainly not least, Professor Puri is passionate about using her expertise to help the most disadvantaged in society. To that end, she has worked in innumerable surgical and medical camps throughout India over the last 25 years. So with that, I am very, very excited to hand things over to Professor Puri. So I am going to stop sharing my screen so that Professor Puri can share hers.
Thank you, Chow. That was a very long introduction, and thank you for all your kind words. I will share my screen now.
That's after I spent a lot of time trimming it, Professor Puri.
Yeah. So, all right, it's such a pleasure to be here amongst all of you. Okay, so it was 1983, a really long time back. I was in my medical school and we had just started our clinical postings. It was past midnight. I was on a round in the emergency ward. There on one of the beds was a young lad, barely 10 years old, lying comatose attached to a ventilator. His elderly father was standing beside him, silent, unmoving, no tears, complete dejection and acceptance on his face. He knew that his beloved boy would not survive. That scene is imprinted in my mind and it seared my soul. The helplessness of a father who knew that his son was not going to survive. A few years later, the first day of my surgical emergency, a young lady was admitted with 80% burns. I remember the ward nurse gave me the surgical tray for venesection and she went back to her ward duties. I knew the theory, I had assisted a few cases, but this time it was the first time I was all on my own. The patient was a case of 80% burns, and she was in that room where we knew that all the larger burns were kept. And I knew that the patient whom I was doing venesection on was not going to survive. The gloves that were provided to me at that time were huge. They were size 7.5. And after struggling, I finally took them off and completed the venous cut down with bare hands. My first surgery was on a 5 years beautiful girl child who fell from the fourth floor. She fell from the balcony of her apartment. She had a subdural hematoma and a very low Glasgow coma scale. She was on ventilator. It is a quirk of fate that her name was also Vinita. I released the subdural hematoma, but she had long gone past. She did not turn around and she passed away peacefully. I think these three events in my medical school affected me subconsciously, and I always wanted to make a difference in the lives of my patients desperately. Looking back, I think these events shaped my work ethics and my sincerity towards my patients. In retrospect, I realize I have always felt compelled to work hard unquestioningly for my patients. Surgical residency in a very busy public hospital in Mumbai was not really easy. Residency was a time of tough work. Most of my seniors and juniors were males, but it didn't really matter. And I doubt I received any concessions for being a female in a male dominated field. Our residency was by and large smooth. A few of the female residents sometimes did hear something sexist, but by and large, we had a wonderful time. But as I went on to do plastic surgery, there were individual instances of biases towards the female residents. Subtle behavioral patterns took its toll, and just a few weeks after joining, one of my female colleagues almost left the course. She was thankfully stopped due to the counseling given to all of us by our professor and guide. He was instrumental in keeping peace and bringing balance to the vitiated atmosphere at that time. We heard later that bets had been laid among the guys to see who amongst us would leave first. Today, my colleague is a well established plastic surgeon, and I'm thankful that she did not have to drop out. So, what are the barriers of success for women surgeons? There are many studies which look at these issues. A 2019 study of surgeons in the US mentions that there is an alarming prevalence of unreported sexual harassment experienced by women surgeons in the US. It is not really just sexual harassment, but discrimination can happen in many forms. Sometimes women do not get the due for the work they do. Women surgeons are sometimes discounted for the work that they have done, and the ideas that they have put forward are undeservedly credited to women. According to a recent study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, this is a 2019 study, it says that one third of the surgical trainees across the country experience gender discrimination or verbal and physical abuse. Among women surgeons in training, nearly two-thirds experience discrimination and 1 in 5 are sexually harassed. Closer home, I want to tell you a story about a lady orthopedic surgeon. She is an attending, and she narrated her ordeal to me. She was sexually harassed by her own resident by words and physical overtures. Being the only female in the whole department, matters could not be resolved internally. And though she took up the matter up to the administration, it was very difficult to prove anything. The resident finally completed his studies, got his degree, and left. But she was left with the stigma of having complained. And many of her male residents then said that they did not want to wash up with me, else she would complain. She was left dejected and depressed, and she went into a shell. I came across a recent write up by a Dr. Chetan Satya, who works in the UK. He's a pediatric surgeon. And he mentioned many such incidents in this article of his. He has written a hard hitting article on sexual harassment, bullying, and discrimination, which is faced by women surgeons. And he does put forth and he says that something essentially needs to be done. And it is not just the women who need to step up, but also the men who need to stop this kind of behavior. So now present and the recent data does suggest that at entry of medical school, in many of the countries, the ratio of men to women is the same. In fact, it is tilted towards women. There are more women in medical school now than men. But as they go on to become senior and as they graduate and do their post graduation, this ratio changes. It gets skewed. And when we evaluate the surgical branches, it is even more skewed. So, why is it that there are so few women in surgery? The issues are basically socio-cultural. Everyone needs to maintain a life-work balance, not just the women. But the life-work balance for women is much more difficult. And we have to accept that because of the socio-cultural scene across the world, there is an unconscious bias. Women surgeons are not any different from being in a traditionally male dominated field. So I think they face the same biases that women would be facing in other male dominated fields. And all of us over the years develop our own coping mechanisms for this unconscious bias. I'll narrate another story to you. Not too long back, I was attending the faculty dinner of our microsurgery conference. I had just entered the hall and we were greeting each other when one of the surgeons saw me and said, "Vinita, how come here?" What surprised me is that he's someone whom I knew well, though we had never worked together. He apologized profusely as soon as he realized what he said. But it was just another example of the bias that women reconstructive surgeons face. Socio-cultural issues often are also difficult to erase, however much we may get educated, it looks like. I recollect when I was to join my plastic surgery residency program, one of the colleagues of my husband is an orthopedic surgeon. So he was asked by one of his colleagues, are you really going to let your wife pursue a super specialty course? She will have a degree more than you. So the people in power, I think the people who are more known need to speak up about this. Mr. Anand Mahindra, a corporate giant, very recently tweeted this cartoon on gender inequality, where he shows women and men in formal attire on the racetrack and how there are so many obstacles in the path of women. An open acceptance by men who are in power to these barriers of success for working women will surely help society reduce the gap between men and women. I must say I'm blessed to have a family who not only encouraged me in all the decisions I took, but who also helped me along the way always. Speaking in a pioneering women in reconstructive surgery program, I cannot but remember those women of the late 18th and the 19th century who were the torchbearers of women physicians and surgeons across the world. In that era, women were not encouraged to learn, and it was felt that studying was a threat to motherhood. The Harvard gynecologist Edward Clark in 1873 wrote words which seem unimaginable in today's world. At that time, he said that women who went to college risked neuralgia, uterine disease, hysteria, and other derangements of the nervous system, such as infertility, because a woman's system never does two things at the same time. It seems unimaginable that somebody would actually put such words on paper. If we are where we are today, it is because we are standing on the shoulders of those giants, those women who became physicians in the late 18th and the 19th century. They took the first leap and went against societal norms. I'm thankful to all those pioneering women who were the first to take up mantles in all the male dominated fields. So at that time in USA, there was the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. It was one of the world's first medical schools for women. The school provided educational opportunities and medical training to some of the pioneering women from across the world. Here you see the first photograph on the left. You see that these are the three women physicians, the ones who took a degree in Western medicine. These were the first one from their individual countries, also the first one from Canada, and some Native American and the Native Americans and the African Americans in USA itself. This photograph was clicked at the Dean's reception in 1885. Here you see the Japanese lady Kiko Okami. So when Kiko Okami went back to Japan, she joined the government college there, a Tokyo hospital, once she reached there. But when the emperor refused to meet her during a hospital visit just because she was a female, she actually left the hospital and went on to do private practice. Susan, the first Native American woman to become a physician, she graduated in 1889. She was inspired after watching a sick Native American woman die after a white doctor refused to treat her. In India, Anandi Joshi, she was the first female doctor of Western medicine in our country. As was the practice at that time, in the late 1880s, she was married at the age of 9. After being married at the age of 9, she lost her first child at 14, and that is what inspired her to study medicine. Another inspiring story is that of Muthulakshmi Reddy. Muthulakshmi Reddy was in fact born in the year that Dr. Joshi died. Dr. Joshi died within a year of having completed her graduation. So at that time, Reddy was born. And she joined the Madras Medical College within after she completed her school. In fact, when she wanted to join college and she wanted to join Maharaja's College, the principal did not let her join the college, saying that it would demoralize the boys. Luckily, the Maharaja was much more knowledgeable, and he allowed Reddy to not only join the college, he also gave her a scholarship. So, with some support from her father and through other support, she managed to become a doctor. She achieved brilliant academic success in her medical school, and she also went on to become a house surgeon. That was unheard of at that time, a female surgeon more than a century back in subjugated India. She had a life story which was very inspiring, and she lived to the ripe old age of 81, and she was known for her social reforms and women's rights activism. The story of beardless lad Dr. James Barry is even weirder still. Born in 1795, he went on to do medicine, and his love for being a military surgeon was taken to the limit. And I keep saying him, but actually, he was not really a he. He was Dr. Miranda, and this was known only after his death. What inspired Dr. Miranda, we will never know. Inspiration, though, can come from many around us. If I reflect on the people who have inspired me, the first lady who comes to mind is Dr. Swaran Arora, my head of the Department of Plastic Surgery. Dr. Swaran Arora is a strong lady and brooked absolutely no indiscipline from us, but she was always there for us when needed. She has lived her life by her own rules, and after having retired from active practice, she continues today also to give her time and energies to charitable surgeries. My guide and teacher in plastic surgery, Dr. Atul Shah, he imbibed in me the seeds of volunteerism. It is not just me, there are so many of us, all his students, who have gone ahead with a lot of volunteerism, and some have volunteered in the country, across the country, and across the globe. I started my journey of surgical camps for leprosy patients during my residency, and even after I left the institute, I continued to volunteer and do so till today. Dr. Raja Savapati. He grew to be my inspiration from the day I heard him in a conference about 20 or 25 years back, speaking about immediate reconstruction of a hand injury patient. Over the years, I have heard him speak at many fora, and I know that if he is there in the program, the hall fills up before time and really fast. His achievements are innumerable. His hospital attracts fellows from all across the world. I know that he and his team do world class surgery, and patients reach there from across the country. As he says, if you treat the patient right, you will automatically prosper. His team is as committed as him because he leads from the front. Here in these photographs, you see that I am with him and his team when I visited Ganga Hospital as a visiting professor a few years back. My parents, though, are my biggest inspiration, and I feel blessed that I was born to them. We cannot choose where we are born, but the luck of the draw can give you a running start in life, and there I do feel that I have been singularly lucky. My mom married at the age of 16 and moved to Bombay at that time, so she had to do her graduation after marriage by correspondence. She brought us up with love and such a soft hand that it is only in retrospect I realized that she was actually a disciplinarian. But her ways were so amazing that we always thought we got what we wanted. She is the one who imbibed in us our value systems, our strong conscience to do the right thing always. She has been a mentor all my life without us labeling the relationship so. Singing was her passion since childhood, and she finally joined music school after we were all done with our schooling. Not only that, she went on to graduate in music too. I love her enthusiasm. I love her passion for everything that she does. And now, at the grand age of 79, she continues to learn new recipes someday. She continues to travel and learn something new. A year back, she tried her hand at quilling and gifted us interesting designs. I think I take inspiration from her every day. My dad, now 89 years of age, was born in a remote village of the Himalayas, the youngest of seven siblings. After his third grade, his father thought it would be too much to send the little boy to a faraway village just for schooling. So he instead told his son that he could spend his time grazing cows. He also thought that he would get one of the elder siblings freed for farm activities. But the principal of the school intervened and requested his father that as the child was very brilliant, he should educate the child. And he also told my dad's dad that if he did not do so, he, the principal, would educate the child himself, but later the family should not lay claim to the boy. So his dad relented, and from a tender age, my dad learned to fend for himself because he went to schools and villages in far off places. He went on to do a PhD and made a name for himself in his chosen field. He's a physicist and a nuclear scientist. Not to rest after retirement, he went on to put together together his life's research work, and at the age of 84, he authored a scientific book published by Elsevier, which is a top international publisher of scientific books. Presently, he is penning his life story. I look forward to his autobiography being published and inspiring many young boys and girls from remote regions of our country. Over the years, I also know that he has provided financial assistance to very many children for higher education, and he continues to give of his savings and retirement pension to many charities. A modest, very simple couple, my parents inspire me in so many different ways. There are many more who have guided me along the way. Dr. Ahuja, Dr. Manoj Kamdar, Dr. Praveen Menezes, to name a few. And they have been in some way mentors in my life, though not in any official mentorship program. Today is the kickoff event for Research's mentorship program. And as you embark on this journey, you know that you are getting into a relationship where the mentee and the mentor will both grow. Your mentors will become you, the mentees. You will realize that your mentors will become your trusted guide and friend. He or she is not really going to hold your hand and operate with you, but your mentor can help you understand your problems and also how to approach problems and cases differently. The mentors can help you solve your problems by evaluating each option with you. So at times, I know that it is very difficult to change oneself. All of you are already in practice probably since a few years, and you may find change difficult, but mentors can provide you with a new perspective. And if you go into this relationship with an open mind, you will have everything to gain and nothing to lose. So, how do you make sure that you grow from this relationship? For you to make the most of this program, it is important for you and the mentor to be committed and to be prompt. Your mentor is making time for you, so as a mentee, you should do your part. Stay accountable, take initiative, and when the time comes, make your face to face time of immense value. Destiny has put you together, make the most of it. If someone had asked me when I was leaving school, where would I be when I was over 50? I would have positively guessed that I was sitting in some corporate hospital, corporate office. Probably I was an engineer, had done management. That is what would have been my guess. But destiny has a way of its own. While growing up, it was always understood that I would join an engineering course. As a 12-year-old child, I loved to tinker with gadgets. I would open up the radio, I would open up the transistor, I would open up the tape recorder and put it all back in place. I had always been my dad's second in command when he was pottering around the house doing some mechanical work or any work in the car or any odd jobs around the house. But after the 12th grade, basically after the 12th grade at that time, there used to be merit lists that were made. And there was a separate merit list for engineering as well as for medicine. As luck would have it, I got decent marks. So I featured in both the merit lists. But the interviews for medical colleges were basically before the engineering college. Mothers being mothers, she advised me to take the seat in the medical college because it was a very good college and I could secure admission immediately. She said that you can, of course, after whenever the engineering interviews are there, you can go ahead and decide at that time to move yourself from the medical school. So I started medical school. I made friends. I enjoyed my first 3 weeks so much that I never went for the engineering college interviews and I went on to become a doctor. Being a surgeon is something that I knew, as I said, pretty early on. Once I started clinical work, I realized that what I wanted to do was something which was in surgery. Now, when we think success, we know that success can be measured by many yardsticks. Success could mean different things for different people. It can mean name, fame, fortune for some. But basically, success is just the accomplishment of any aim or purpose. I'm happy that I have been guide and teacher to so many. Many of them in this photograph are my students, all of whom today are doing very well and are wonderful, well established plastic surgeons across the country. I'm happy that I have received awards and gained academic achievements. I'm happy that I'm part of the research family and have been the conduit between patients in far off India and Research International, the scheme having benefited so many of my patients. I'm happy that I have been the instrument for happiness and social integration of all the children whom we have taken along for our burn survivor camp. This camp is the first and one of its kind in our country. I think this is a project which is probably closest to my heart. I have seen such devotion in all the people who have been involved with the camp, and I feel blessed that everybody who has joined in has stayed on. All the volunteers who take a lot of trouble for the children. And my heart actually brims with warmth and love for all of them who have helped make this possible. I feel somehow that they are living and they have helped me live my dream for these kids. Had I a goal and an end in mind when I was young, do I feel that I have accomplished what I had set out to do? I don't know that, but I know that my mantras throughout in life have been passion, excellence, and staying inspired. Passion for everything you do. If you are passionate and enjoy every bit that you do, you will automatically work hard towards your every action. If you love your work as if it is your hobby, you will be happy every day. So, what are the key things that I have learned in my journey till now? I think it is important to revel in each positive step that you take. So, be your own inspiration. There are many who feel that if we are to be a success, we should have big dreams, big goals. But I think it's okay if you don't have a big dream. I took my life as it flowed, kept going, one small goal after the other, doing your best every day. The beginning may be the hardest always, but if you aim for excellence, that is all that matters. If you go after your dreams with passion, you are sure to be rewarded. Have confidence in yourself. Believe in yourself. If you trust yourself, half your battle is won. It's important to be your own worst critic and to be honest about your capabilities. But it is equally important not to put yourself down. I've also learned to accept the outcome when I have done everything that is humanly possible from my side, to let go and not be stressed about things that I have no control over. Bhagwan Sri Krishna in the Gita says, Karmanya vadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. Do your duty diligently without worrying about the fruits of your action. Also, in life, look at matters from the other's perspective. It will help resolve most issues. Talk. Talk about what you want to do and achieve. This did not come easy to me, but I think it is important to talk and share our thoughts with people. It will help you to connect to those who share your ideas. It will help you to connect with like minded people and people who will believe in you. Sometimes the best associations are formed this way. I credit my association with research to Dr. Sabapati. He knew of my passion for burn patients and he believed in me, and so he introduced me to Jim. Also, there are many sticky situations which we face in life, and it is important to deal with them with dignity and poise. I think it is also important to deal with any problem and situation swiftly and correctly, especially as we have to work with the same people all the time. Don't blame the situation on being a woman. Crumple the thought and instead be the change. Be the change, for it is you who have the power to be the change makers in your countries. Shikha, Farzana, Sheelu, Faith, Selma, all you young reconstructive surgeons, you have a wonderful opportunity in front of you, made possible by research and SkinCeuticals. You are the chosen ones and have already gone through the program to develop your surgical and administrative skills and are now entering a mentorship program. Seize these opportunities. Make the most of it. I know that all of you will do a lot of good in your respective countries serving the needs of reconstruction. All you need is to continue to have confidence in yourself. And many years hence, you will be mentoring the young men and women in your country, taking your craft ahead. And I look forward to see you grow and to achieve great heights in your life. But while you are doing that, remember to have other avenues of good times too, so that you can have a good work life balance. Do not ever feel like a prisoner in your own sincerity. What is it that makes your heart sing? What brings a smile to your face? What brings that soft light of love in your eyes? Please pursue that too with the same passion which you devote to your work. Make time for yourself, for that which makes your heart sing and your feet dance. Richard Bach, in his book Illusions, writes, "You are never given a wish without also being given the power to make it true. You have to work for it, however. For after all, there are no real shortcuts to success. But let me tell you, the world is all yours if you work towards it." Thank you.
Thank you.